everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, our last episode was about how the virtues require activism, that virtues are not simply attributes that are passive attributes, but require action. The virtues are nouns, essentially. They're action words.
Well, you mean verbs. They are nouns.
I mean verbs. Sorry, verbs.
They are nouns, but we know that they must manifest themselves to be.
Can we start over?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff. And today we are talking about, we are sort of segueing from last episode where we talked about the virtues requiring activism.
Yes, that the virtues are not simply passive attributes, but are verbs. They are action words and require action and activism.
Certainly they must, if it wants to claim the virtues, they must manifest somehow.
Exactly.
You can't simply claim to be virtuous without showing those virtues actively.
And so that was going to be a lead into an episode. We were going to talk about politics generally and how the virtues apply to politics and how the vices manifest themselves as well. But we would be remiss in our practice of the virtues if we did not talk about Ukraine.
What's going on in Eastern Europe right now?
Yes. And
so before we get into this, though, speaking of remission, what are you drinking?
Well, often I will have a glass of, there it is, invisible glass again. I'll have a glass of wine. Tonight, I'm going straight for the Irish whiskey.
All right.
This is Redbreast.
No vodka.
No vodka. I thought about that too, and I have exclusively American-made vodkas, although I was discussing with people who recommended a particular Icelandic vodka that I have yet to try. This is, excuse me, this is Redbreast Irish whiskey, single pot still, Lustau finished. And Lustau is a Spanish port or sherry maker. And so it's a sherry finish.
So it's finished in those casks? Is that
finished in those casks. I really like it. And when I make one of my favorite cocktails, an artist's special, which uses whiskey and sherry, I will often use this because it's already sherry finished. So it goes well with it. So there you go. And this is a Norlin whiskey glass, which is a double-walled glass, which
familiar with them.
Works very well. So what are you drinking?
I've got a gift from our good friends Briar and Aaron in Canada, when they, in the very narrow window we had several weeks ago where they were able to cross the border, they brought me a bottle of Coeur du Bois. It is a maple flavored Canadian whiskey. Very nice, very
Heart
mellow.
of Bois.
Coeur. It's Coureur. I'm not sure what that translates to exactly. It's not heart like coeur is.
Okay.
Dubois. So,
well,
but it's very nice, mellow, sweet Canadian
here's
whiskey.
to the people of Ukraine.
Stand tall.
Yep.
Fight hard.
So
an amazing amount of international support.
Yes.
Has been shown.
And first of all, I think that the leadership demonstrated by President Biden in the United States is exemplary in terms of organizing, telling everybody what was going to happen, so there were no surprises, and using the time to organize the international response in a way that avoids having to actually engage with armed forces. Because, and while it may come to that at some point, because if Putin doesn't stop and continues, I mean, after this, it's NATO countries, and all the NATO countries would be obliged to respond by treaty. But there are people who are, I'm getting ahead of myself here. One of the first virtues that we list is honesty, veritas.
Yes.
And there's so much, not just bullshit, but outright lying going on, and not just from Putin and his ilk, but from American politicians,
American commentators
and commentators who are saying, oh, what do we care? He's not so bad. It's deserved. He's right. It's when years ago, they would have said the opposite. And if the president had done nothing, then they would have been criticizing him. It's completely, well, you can't shame someone for hypocrisy who has no sense of shame.
Right. As we've established.
Yes. So the first thing that's required in demonstrating a virtue, whether it's politically, personally, professionally, is honesty. And the lack of honesty, Putin even not telling the army where they were necessarily going. There were soldiers who were said, oh, you're just going out on maneuvers or doing stuff, and suddenly they're in a fighting war.
Right.
And meeting,
Ukraine's already taken over 200 prisoners.
Yes.
Very young soldiers, what I understand, who pretty much just realized what was happening and laid down their arms and walked away and said, well, this is not what we signed up for.
Right.
I mean, it is what they signed up for, but they just didn't expect to actually have to fulfill a contract. I mean,
well, they didn't expect to fight, to invade and fight their neighbors.
Right.
Many of whom, with whom they have families, relations, and there are lots of cross-border relationships and family history. So, and based on a lie that Ukraine is and was and should be part of a restored Russian Empire or Soviet Union, which seems to be Putin's dream, his ego. And that kind of ego is a vice. I think we need to talk about the vices in this situation as well as the virtues.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no, I mean, you can't talk about war without talking about vice. That's exactly what war is the demonstration of so many vices. And it's interesting that we I mean, the cult of chivalry rose from a warrior culture.
Yes.
Right. I mean, you can't really deny that. It's interesting to me, though, how actual war this is not a gentleman's game anymore. I mean, real war is about destroying cultures. It's about wiping out populations in order to restore land to someone who lays whatever spurious claim they have.
Well, and traditionally, I mean, before the modern era, war was about conquering territory.
Mm-hmm.
In the modern era, war was about armies defeating armies, and civilian populations were not the target, but they were the collateral damage, which is a fucking euphemism if I ever heard it.
But there's always been collateral damage.
There has always been, but now it's back to targeting civilian populations. It's
well,
back
the purpose of targeting civilian population it's terrorism is what it is.
It is. It is exactly
it's
that.
military terrorism,
Yes.
trying to raise popular objection to holding out.
Yes.
That surrender can't be any worse than this, and at least the bombs will stop dropping. That's their desired response. The Britons. That's you look at the Britons during World War II and the bombings that they underwent, and it just hardened their resolve.
Yes, and I think that's what's going on here too.
Certainly,
I think nearly 900,000 Ukrainians have left and are refugees in other countries. But there are a lot who are staying, and there's some who are returning to Ukraine to fight, and which brings us to another virtue, courage.
Mm-hmm.
The courage of the people there making Molotov cocktails and learning how to fire weapons and
improvising tank traps and welding things in their garage to block streets, and it's amazing.
And some of I know at least one of the armorers, because
there's a couple of them actually.
Ukraine has several really world-class makers of medieval armor for steel fighting and the SCA and other of those communities. And they posted a picture of themselves making rebar into caltrops.
Yeah.
It's like, good for you guys. Don't worry about fulfilling your orders, because they said we're sorry, we'll get to them when we can. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We're building fortifications now, so we'll have to wait for the armor.
Yeah, exactly. But courage, and certainly it should be mentioned, President Zelensky, who, when was offered evacuation, said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition, which is going to go down as one of the greatest quotations in along lines of General McAuliffe's nuts, as a reply to the Germans who asked him to surrender, that I learned about from my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Dale P. Harper, U.S. Navy retired.
Or Winston Churchill. He will be quoted alongside Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
In the future, I think.
He's certainly stepped up to the situation. And that's an example of courage. When you're confronted with a situation, do you step up or do you step back? And he is stepping up to it. And
I'm very glad to see it, because I'm not sure that, his ilk, he and Trump and Boris Johnson are the populist celebrity. Well, Boris Johnson has been a politician for years, but has played the populist, I'm just one of you, I'm going to root out corruption, and it's so like Donald Trump. They all of them ran on populist platforms and anti-corruption, although demonstrably Trump is one of the most corrupt politicians we've ever had.
Yes.
But despite all that, he is walking the walk. When faced with the situation, he is acting
Zelensky
is, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He has stepped up, as you said, and is doing the thing a leader needs to do. Despite whatever his background may be, which was as a comedian, satirist.
Yeah.
He has taken it up. So, good for him.
I think also the Klitschko brothers, who were both each rather heavyweight boxing champions.
They are, yeah. One is Vitaly
and Vladimir.
And
Klitschko.
Vitaly is mayor of
Kiev.
Yeah, Vitaly. Right.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes here. And Vladimir joined the reserve Ukrainian army several months ago.
Yeah.
Both of them were heavyweight world champions.
Yeah.
And have either stayed or returned to fight. These two guys are, they are the prototype Slavic hero, tough guy. I mean, they're every cartoon Russian tough guy,
except they're
Ukrainian.
Right.
I mean, they're all Slavs. Yeah. So
Ivan Drago from the Rocky movie.
Yeah, the
Dolph Lundgren
part.
Yeah.
Who was more of he was a sort of a Soviet robot Superman.
Yes. But
Not,
the Klitschko, that was a cartoon, but the Klitschkos are the real deal.
They are the real deal, but they are, like I said, they are the popular hero of that entire culture come to life.
Yeah.
We're on your TV right now.
But it would be easy for them with their means, their wealth,
to
leave.
Other fighters have fled or
in other situations, certainly. And
in this situation,
in this situation,
one of my favorite fighters to watch, Vasily Lomachenko,
yes,
is fled to Greece.
Is he Ukrainian?
Yeah, he's a Ukrainian. Yeah, he fought he was a Ukrainian Olympic medalist.
I've watched Lomachenko because his footwork is
he's amazing
great to watch. And he left. He went to Greece.
Yes,
that's disappointing.
At least that's what I have read. That's what I read in one article.
Well, I think in every armed conflict there are always conflicting accounts.
True.
And so a lot will remain to be sorted out afterwards. I just saw one story that the white hat hacker group Anonymous actually has hacked and taken down Russian control of their own spy satellites. I don't know if it's true. I hope it's true.
I heard had attacked Russian state television.
Yes. And I hope that whatever they're doing, I hope the U.S. Cyber Command is taking notes.
I hope they're hiring them.
Yes, exactly. So I think in this, the opposite of courage, which is cowardice, look at the number of Russian oligarchs who have fled, trying to, there are accounts of these $1 million yachts and private planes and being seized and in other places, and because they're trying to hide their wealth because Russia's been cut off from the international banking system.
Right.
And while
there's all these yachts with Krugerrands as ballast sailing international waters right now.
Yeah. So cowardice too, because they're just thinking about themselves. And isn't that what cowardice is, where you're thinking about yourself and not about other people and not about what the right thing is to do?
Right.
I think the great hope is that the people around Putin will depose him when things become intolerable there, but he's pretty well isolated. So
it is heartening to see despite the attitudes of the Russian police and so on, the protests that are going on in Russia right now
that
are very heartening to see.
Yes, and a real demonstration of courage given what can happen to people,
and is happening still.
Yes, happening. And being arrested and
I'd also like to say I salute the Ukrainian people for their. I've seen some videos that have made their way out of just groups of unarmed civilians just backing up armed Russian occupiers, just walking
Yeah.
towards them and forcing them to retreat rather than open fire on civilians.
Right.
I hope that strategy continues, and I hope it doesn't go the wrong way.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
It's still this is just day 6, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's also a demonstration of generosity of people who are I know I saw one thing where Russian somebody was starting a movement to find Ukrainian merchants selling digital files on Etsy so you could buy them from them and they would have a way of getting compensated for that. I'm not sure how that would work with them being cut off from well, it's Russia cut off from the banking system, sorry. So Ukrainians, to give them direct monetary support individually by buying a digital image or
an NFT
something.
of some kind.
Not an NFT, because that's not a one-off and done, but oh, you created a poster? Yeah, I'll give you $5 and download this poster. Or something like that. So it's not an NFT. If we want to talk about NFTs and cryptocurrency sometime and the bullshit that is, that's another episode.
Yeah.
But tulips, like Holland tulip futures in the 17th, 18th century. But anyway, humility and the opposite of humility, which is pride, ego. That is the flaw here. The ego, Putin's ego, thinking that the accounts say he was so offended by the collapse of the Soviet Union that it's been his ambition to rebuild the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire with him as the emperor, essentially, which he is de facto anyway.
Yeah.
That's ego, to this astonishing ego. And it's Shakespearean ego, and in the tragic way.
Yeah.
Of the downfall of somebody who,
it's almost more like a Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
Kind of. With a Greek tragedy, it was more about defying the gods. Your pride is driving you to put yourself on equal footing with the gods, and that's never any good.
He's certainly comes of that. Demonstrating hubris, which is which reminds me, I'm reminded my essay, my application essay as to Northwestern when I was enrolling, applying as a undergraduate, was about hubris and the war in Vietnam, and how hubris, and so I related it to Greek tragedy and the idea of hubris, and as a manifestation and an echo of the past in that, and typed it in very small type, the smallest typewriter type, because I was using a typewriter, I could find with the smallest margins, so I could fit it all on one page.
Was that a rule that it had to fit?
It had to be one page. Wow. So it should have been 2 or 3 pages. But as I think it was Mark Twain who said, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So, because it takes time to
sure
concisify your writing. Concise. concise
Edit.
edit. Yeah. Okay.
Is the word you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay. I knew it was in there somewhere. So prowess, I don't know. Well, we can talk about prowess as a virtue, because the prowess in warfare is no longer just about fighting. It's about logistics. Well, it's, and that's, professionals concern themselves with logistics. I don't remember who said that, but I think that really is the cutting off their supplies, their access to money, their ability to travel by air, their ability to export. They're cutting, essentially, in a world that is so connected by international supply chains, cutting them off has immediately crashed their economy,
Yeah,
to a significant degree, where the ruble is worth less than a penny
yep,
now. And so modern warfare prowess is much more complex than simply our guys can kill more of your guys, or can fight better than your guys.
sure. And it's been like that since the 70s, really, right? I
Right,
mean,
right.
Another prowess is the sort of a diplomatic prowess, where
Mhm.
you're navigating a space where you have to do something, but you can't do everything.
Right.
Because everything now is global extinction. That is the end game now.
Yeah.
Is global extinction.
And has been for
Yes.
a while.
And for a long time, I read a book once.
You read a book once?
I did. I have one book. I have one book in my library. It's a it's a very narrow shelf, but it's a book called War. The title is War, and the author is
What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that's true either. I think there is a place for it. But this book is the author is Gwynne Dyer, who is a Canadian Air Force colonel, I believe. And it was a accounting of warfare from the hoplites all the way to Vietnam. And from the individual soldier's perspective, what was his equipment? How was he trained? What did he think? Where did he live? How did he make his money? Where did he come from? All of that, all of those hundreds of years, thousands of years. So, but in the end, he talks about, all through it, he talks about the motives for war, right? And motives for war are acquisition of resources, one way or another. That is, no matter what politicians paste over it to get people to go fight, that is the purpose, or has been the purpose of war. And he paints this picture that there's no sense, there's no point of a body, a country, whatever, going to war if they cannot gather resources. And if you basically irradiate the globe, you do not gain resources.
Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, and is renowned still for his insight into strategy, wrote that the evil ruler will burn his country to the ground to rule over the ashes.
Yes. And we have yet to see that. I mean, it was
Stalin, Pol Pot, there have been rulers, Mao Zedong, there have been rulers who purged their own country of millions of people.
Yes, but that's an internal, that is them carrying out their populist agenda. That is their internal politics that did all of that. What I'm talking about is invading another country to gain their resources.
Well, and in some ways, that's what Putin has in mind, because
absolutely,
Ukraine is
referred to as the breadbasket.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it works hand in hand with his ego of a restored Russian Empire, because that kind of empire building is about acquiring resources, but also feeding ego. The larger your empire, I mean, that's what the British Empire was about. It was resources.
Absolutely.
The origins of the war in Vietnam, which we tend to think of as an American conflict, actually started when before World War II, it was called French Indochina. Yep. It was a French colony because they had rubber plantations, which fueled Michelin tires and so on. And when World War II came, the French left, and Ho Chi Minh led the resistance to the Japanese.
Right.
And when the war was over, the French came back and said, "We're back." And Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese said, "The hell you are. We got rid of the Japanese. We're not taking." So they started fighting
to somebody else.
Right. So they started fighting against the French, and the US started bankrolling it, and then eventually took over.
Right. Well, and it was publicized in this country as anti-communist because of the Chinese takeover.
It was here's the problem with the dishonesty of propaganda, is that the people who are behind it know it's a lie.
Right.
But they will convince true believers. There are a couple of, well, there's several, unfortunately, people in Congress whose names I don't want to mention, but fuck them, who hecklers during the State of the Union, who I think are unfortunately true believers in the bullshit that they're spouting, but it's nonsense, and they don't know enough to distinguish between what's true and what isn't, and have believed what is not true because it feeds their ego to believe it. They are the people with the special secret knowledge and are fighting against the tier.
Like every conspiracy theorist,
yes,
believes that they are a special in the know group. And and I was getting to this in my relating of this book, is that Gwynne Dyer says that we don't have to worry about superpowers going to war with nuclear weapons, because the people who run the superpowers, Russia and the United States and now China, know what's going on, know that it's about resources and that you can't gain. He said that you don't have to worry about superpowers going to war. What we have to worry about is a tiny little fanatical ideologue leader, in a small country, starting a nuclear war, because like in a religious fanatic believes that they are going to get their reward after they die.
Yeah.
It's not about resources for them. It's about their afterlife.
I think that in this case, though, it's possible that Putin's ego will not allow him to fail. It's possible that he will do what Sun Tzu says, burn it all down to rule over the ashes. Fiona Hill, who was who testified before Congress. Very, very impressive woman. She was a senior director for Europe and Russia at the United States National Security Council. Testified to Russia. I'm just looking over at my notes there. A woman who, from Britain, who came to the United States because her lower class British accent would have impeded her professional growth, her professional career in Britain, she believed.
She hadn't gone to Eton.
And came to the United States. She's brilliant. And she wrote just recently that, yeah, Putin, it's a real concern that Putin might actually blow it all up. And
but I think our hope is that, as you mentioned earlier, is that the people close to him will realize that his ego is going to get all the rest of us killed.
Yeah, and I think that the analogy is to the last days of Trump, where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, if he issues an order, check with me first.
Right.
Because he's an unstable lunatic. He's an ego-driven, unstable lunatic. That's the reason that I don't want to even mention that the Orange Menace's name again for fear he'll show up like Candyman, right? That's the reason he admires Putin so much. He said he's a genius.
Yeah.
What a genius move.
Well, it wasn't particularly genius anyway. It was obvious to anybody monitoring the world stage what was happening, what was going to happen.
And an evil genius is still evil.
Yeah. Right. Well, I hope it's a situation. I mean, what was the operation? The German High Command basically had a plan to assassinate Hitler. And I don't remember, there was they had Tom Cruise did a movie about it. I don't remember what it was called, but I'm hoping it's going to be more like that, where he's just going to be cut off and locked in a room somewhere, and they're going to go on.
Except that failed. Let's hope this one succeeds.
Well, yeah, and I don't care if he's assassinated. You know, maybe he's shown to be, I don't know, maybe they trump up some, I hate to use that word again, but they gin up some corruption charges that they can easily prove.
Yeah, he and his oligarchs have looted the country of vast sums of money, which I mean, that's what the former president, who shall not be named, also did the opposite of draining the swamp. He put his own cronies in and used it to enrich himself and them. So humility. I'm not even sure we need to elaborate on the lack of humility, because we've talked about ego. And isn't invading your neighboring country the opposite of courtessy?
One would think, you know.
Oh, excuse me, do you mind if we pass through?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. You know, well, it's an invasion. You weren't invited. That's you know, but the propaganda, and this is another thing that to the rest of the world makes it obvious what's happening, is that not only as we cut off Russia from the rest of the world economy, Putin is cutting his people off from international communications.
Yes.
So that they only hear his versions of what's happening in Ukraine and the motives for it. And he's telling his own people that well, Nazis are taking over Eastern Ukraine and he's going to liberate the free, their brothers from Nazism
Right.
and authoritarianism. And that's
And
just
they have the Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is Jewish,
right.
and the Russians bombed a Holocaust memorial.
Yeah,
but the people in Russia don't necessarily know this. One of the things I just saw someone suggest was find the website of, go to Google Maps, find Russian restaurants, go to pick several, go to their website, find a place to leave comments, and in your comments say, this is what's happening in Ukraine, as a way to get the news to people. I think that based on the protests that are happening, I think the people there realize what's going on. And I think the news of that will spread. They're Russian. They have for a long time lived with communicating with each other in secret about the truth of what's going on. They're practiced at that. So I think that he's trying, but it's extremely difficult to isolate your own people from the truth anymore.
No, but what it does is it allows, like in this country, when you got people who watch nothing but Fox News, right? It allows the opposition. It allows the opposition to hold on to their belief,
right,
and oppose. They've got an alternate set of facts to say, here, no, that's not what's really happening. Here's what's happening. We support, so it just slows down the process of the people rising up and saying, no, this is wrong. We should not.
Selective reasoning and confirmation bias, and it absolutely feeds into that.
Yeah. You remember a scene?
I remember everything. I remember everything. Yeah.
Oh God, I hope not. God has not saw fit to curse me with a perfect memory. But
I remember the last time you said that.
Do you do?
Yes.
I thought that was completely original.
April 17th, 1984 at 9:53 p.m. in a hotel room in Akron.
Huh. I was going to say, I was like as not, I was sleeping on your couch around that time.
Oh yeah, it could have been. Yeah. So anyway.
But speaking of Russians and Jews, Fiddler on the Roof.
Yes.
Oh no, you know what? It's not Fiddler on the Roof. No, it couldn't be. But there was a scene where these two Russians are arguing about Stalin. And one is telling Stalin about how, no,
that was Fiddler on the Roof was set.
Was the Tsar.
Stalin.
Yeah. But
may the Lord bless and keep the Tsar far away from us.
Yeah. But these two guys are arguing about Stalin, and one's saying that Stalin's weak, and Stalin couldn't hit a toilet if he was standing over it with his urine. He's so weak. And the other guy is saying, Comrade Stalin's urine stream is strong. Like this ridiculous argument, but someone who is so entrenched in the mythology of their own ideas that they'll defend it against even the most absurd attack, where the thing he's saying is a joke, but he can't take it anything but deadly seriously.
Right. Yeah. So propriety goes out the window in war.
Well, yeah.
So although there are rules of war,
there are, but they have to be agreed to.
They do. And
if you think you're going to win by breaking them, you can ignore them.
Yeah. And the rules of war, the modern rules of war, are about only attacking military targets and
Right.
essentially only fighting in defense of your country. Well, it's like the rules of legal defense, self-defense.
Yeah.
And not initiating aggression. And that is why the false justification for the Iraq war was so disturbing, because it was the justification was stated as, this is an assertive act of self-defense because they have weapons of mass destruction, which they didn't, and they're going to use them against us, which they weren't. And it completely destabilized the region. It was just a horrible undertaking for false reasons.
Oh yeah.
But under the guise of the propriety of self-defense, active self-defense, which it wasn't.
No.
Moderation is a virtue, and again, that's something that in warfare goes to hell. I'm reminded of something that Hawkeye's character in MASH says, MASH, the TV series, says that people say war is hell. War is not hell. War is war, and hell is hell, and of the two, war is worse, because the only people who are in hell are people who deserve it. But in war, the innocent suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And which brings me to justice. If there is justice, and the saying is that the arc of the universe bends towards justice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bend by itself. We have to keep pulling on it.
Yeah.
That as the we are not obligated to fix the world by ourselves, but neither are we allowed to not try. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a translation anyway. That you have to keep working towards justice. No one can do it all by themselves, but you have to keep trying. And I think that's demonstrated really by the people of Ukraine and the international community all working together in this. People, the international community working to support the people in Ukraine, and the people in Ukraine standing up for themselves with fortitude, another one of our of the chivalric virtues.
Well, I'm a little torn. I recognize, from a chivalric viewpoint, I recognize the necessary avoidance of a global conflict, which will almost certainly escalate.
Yes.
If we engage in it. I mean, every expert says we should engage. That if it comes to, if the U.S. enters, and it's been implied already that if the U.S. enters the conflict in Ukraine, Putin says, or has implied, that he will activate his nuclear arsenal.
Yes. Although him saying that he's putting it on a higher alert it was posturing, because it's already on alert. The nuclear forces of countries that have nukes are always on alert.
Yes.
At some level.
I recognize. So, but it's a more overt threat, certainly, because of these actions. But so I recognize that, and I see the necessity to do what we can, but there is a point at which I think we have to fight. I think the United States, if we are going to reclaim any kind of prominence in Western diplomacy. I mean, Biden, I think, is doing the best job he can after the undermining that his predecessor did in the world community. But I think there's a point where we are going to have to put up or shut up. We have to fight.
Wow. Yeah. Well,
2/3 of our national budget goes to our military. What else is it for?
Yes, they call it defense, the defense budget.
Yeah, we don't, no other country seems to need so much defense.
Yes. So I think about I think it's called the Fermi Paradox, why we haven't detected any other extraterrestrial civilizations. I think that's what it's called. And the theory is that there's several possibilities. We're the only one that's ever arisen, the only sentient species that's ever arisen. That's ridiculous based on the
statistically
ridiculous. The other is that societies reach certain inflection points and don't make it past a certain point. This could be it.
Yeah.
This could be it for us. So I think that I hope that there are people with more information than you and I have.
Well, we always hope for that.
Making decisions based on the best information that they have about what the consequences would be. Certainly, there's wargaming. I mean, that's the name of the movie, where would you like to play a game?
Right.
Tic-tac-toe, right? Nobody wins. The only way to win is not to play. The question in the war games is, what's the next move and what happens after that? And do we actually deploy ground forces, air forces, conventional forces in a situation where he might burn it all down to rule over the ashes?
Well, yes.
What do we do? And
but there's to me, this, and you can call me naive, plenty of people have, but this is schoolyard bully tactics. If nobody draws a line and says this far, no further,
right,
at some point, then there is no hope.
Yeah, and in theory and principle, I agree with that. However, where you draw the line and how you respond when the other person crosses it that's the critical, those are the critical decisions. And that remains to be seen what will happen. And if this is our last episode, it's been nice talking to you.
Well, the United States has always maintained that we will never be the first to launch, ever.
Right.
And that's, so far, nobody can say we've lied about that. Right?
Well,
nobody
since the end of World War II.
Well, yes. Well, we were the only one in place.
Right. Huh? Right. So we were the only ones then. So
that's correct. And I don't know. I'm not an international diplomat. Probably good thing for everybody there. But it seems to me you've got to look a bully in the eye and say, all right, if it's a fight, then I guess we'll have to fight. I don't want to fight. This is not the fight I want. But if you step over this line, we're fighting. And I will fight you with every goddamn thing I've got.
Yes. And I think that in that situation, if it's a bully and you say, no further, and the bully pushes it further, well, how do you attack? How do you defend yourself?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to take out a machine gun and gun them down, right?
Well,
so there is a level of response, and you can say, look, you step over that line, and I'm going to punch you right in the mouth.
And I think what we are doing, I think what the international community is doing is punching him in the mouth. Right.
I think what the international community is doing, and I will, bow to their expertise on what is the correct response in this case. But I don't think this is not the international community is, if I can extend the schoolyard bully, this is, you've got the big bully picking on the little nerd guy. Okay. That's happening right in the middle of the schoolyard. And the whole school is standing around watching it. The international community is saying, if you hit him, we're not going to sit with you at lunch. Nobody is stepping between them who is of a size with the bully and saying, leave him alone, or you have to deal with me.
And the reason for that is because the calculation has been that the bully will then pull out the machine gun and shoot everybody.
Agreed.
And the school and themselves and the world.
I understand that. I
get your point. I think that to extend this analogy, when I was in junior high, a guy it was gym class, as we were all headed to the locker room, he flying kicked me in the back, blindside kicked me in the back, knocked me down out of nowhere. I didn't know what had happened. And my friends picked my friends picked me up, and I said, what the hell happened? And they said, well, that guy, he just kicked you. And I saw him and his friends walking off laughing. And they said, what do you want to do about it? I said, I'm going to report it. They said, well, he's just going to get angry. I said, I don't care. That was wrong. And I'm not going to take him on myself. I'm going to report him. So I went to the gym teacher, and the gym teacher took me and the witnesses to the vice principal for student affairs, whatever it was. And I told him what happened, and he brought them in and talked to them. So next gym class, I'm in the locker room and I'm changing. So when you're changing in a locker room, you feel kind of vulnerable anyway. And this guy and his friends, and they were big guys, came up to me, and I thought, and everybody's looking like, oh my, here it goes. And so I just looked at him, and he extended his hand, and I said, and apologized. I'm sorry, it will never happen again. Said, thank you very much for apologizing. And that was it.
All right.
So
that's great.
It was, but that was standing up to a bully doesn't always mean punching him in the nose as your first alternative.
No, but see, okay, no, you're right. And I'm not, that's not what I'm saying. We've already gone past what's your first response? I mean, you didn't have a chance to defend yourself.
Right.
It was a cowardly attack when you weren't looking.
God, I haven't thought about that in years.
So you didn't have a chance for a first response.
Right.
You found yourself in a position of, well, I could get in just as much trouble as him if I go and hit him now. Right. So you did the right thing. You did the responsible adult thing.
I was being encouraged by my friends not to do it, to just let it go.
Sure.
It's like, I'm not just letting it go. But I think we can take that analogy too far, because there's a lot more going on.
I think mine was pretty on point. Thank you very
much. So the other virtues on our list include moderation,
right?
Justice,
yep,
fortitude. Got to commend the fortitude of the Ukrainian people for what they're doing. Franchise, loyalty, and I think about the people who are returning to Ukraine to fight.
Certainly, and of
course,
certainly our examples of the Klitschko brothers are a good example of loyalty.
Yes, and others as well. Well, President Zelensky, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. He's staying. He could have gotten out, but he's staying. Good for him.
I changed my profile picture to a sort of smaller, a graphic version of that saying.
Yes. Oh, so symbols of,
well, it's it's a, your Facebook profile picture is a circle, right? Mine's divided in half, blue and yellow, like you've seen. And the top is just text, and it says plus ammo, and underneath it, it says the word ride with a red X across it.
Yeah. And I found a photograph by, I think, a Ukrainian photographer that is a blue sky over a gold field, yellow field.
Over a field of sunflowers?
Yeah, just something, or I'm not sure if it's sunflowers, but
okay.
So
a wheat field would be just absolutely as appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean, although the sunflower apparently is the national flower of
the woman, the referring to her as a grandmother, I don't know if she's a grandmother, who walked up to a Russian soldier and handed him sunflower seeds and said, put these in your pocket so sunflowers will grow where your body falls.
Well, yeah, the translation is when you lie down here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, essentially meaning when you die.
But that's a more grandmotherly thing to say.
Yes. So, I think about my grandparents who essentially escaped from Europe and forebears before that. They lived in Latvia, and there was apparently a tradition on my father's side of the family that when young men got to be of an age where they might be drafted into the Tsar's army, they were shipped off to America. So they wouldn't have to fight for the Tsar, because the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, were considered part of Russia at the time. They didn't consider themselves part of Russia, but Russia considered themselves part of the greater Russian Empire. And I've seen documents about my grandparents, and it says birthplace Russia, but it wasn't. They weren't Russian. And those countries are very concerned because, because they were part of the Russian Empire and part of the Soviet Union and are independent now and want to stay that way. They're also NATO countries.
Yeah.
And the NATO, I forget what the article is in the NATO treaty that says you attack one of us, you attack all. The only time that's ever been,
I saw that recently, but
the only time that's ever been invoked was on 9/11.
Yeah.
And
which we didn't have an actual enemy.
Well, we could get into that would be a lengthy discussion, and another discussion about the opportunity and how the opportunity to bring the world together was squandered by wanting to punch the bully in the face instead of cutting them off at the knees. it was,
But the problem with 9/11
but
is
that's a longer discussion. Another, it's a
Okay.
tactical one too. And tactics is always about what is your end, well, strategy rather. What are you trying to achieve?
right.
And what's the best way to achieve it? And it's something I think we've talked about in courtesy and conversation, that if your objective is to come to a resolution, is to find an agreement, then you find ways to do that. You use tactics that will accomplish that objective. Calling a person an asshole when you know they are, and that's what they deserve to be called, generally it may be initially and briefly emotionally satisfying, but it doesn't help you achieve your objective. Punching the bully in the nose may achieve your objective of getting the bully to shut the fuck up and stop what they're doing, or it may actually be an impediment to your objective of getting the bully to stop what they're doing and to defend other people. So it's a question of strategy and tactics.
Right. And if you believe, by going to the vice principal, you can make it all stop. If you can, if the bully can be pointed out and stopped from acting altogether, then that is the correct strategy. If however, the vice principal shrugs his shoulders and doesn't do anything, then what?
Well, I didn't have to go that far.
No, but
I know, but I understand. And it's interesting to speculate now, because I never had to go that far. How would I have exacted my revenge? Because it would have been revengeance, not justice. What would I have done to the perpetrator and his friends who watched what he did and laughed, if the vice principal had not taken action? What would I have done?
Sometime I suspect I have, and this is not the place for me to tell you the story where when I was in late grade school, my mother was divorcing and we moved around a few times. And you had to be the new kid. And the new kid is a target.
Yep.
Sometimes. And I was. And I didn't want to be a target for any longer than I absolutely had to be. So I did not go to the vice principal.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a fair fight between me and a bigger kid either.
Yeah.
It was a demonstration of this is what will happen every single time unless you kill me.
Yeah. I think that now I'm going to have to speculate and think about what would have happened. Because I didn't at that point have a backup plan, but I can imagine all sorts of things that I could do now. Thank goodness I'm not back in junior high school or high school, knowing what I know now and being who I am now.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Anyway, so that
yeah.
What I worry about, what from a philosophical point of view, and people will say, well, it's not practical, it's not pragmatic, it's not, you know what, if you cannot practice your philosophy, why do you have one? But my point is only that I don't want us to be the US that has the way that what the US has done in every single world, like there's been a whole bunch in both world wars, was wait until we couldn't possibly do anything else, where millions suffered and died before we took any action.
Isn't that what Churchill said? The Americans will always do the right thing when they have no other choice. Nothing. Yeah.
So, I mean, we sit here in this country and we talk about how we won, if it wasn't for us, Europe would have been overrun. Yeah, you're right. if it wasn't for us. However, if it had been for us 2 years earlier, the millions of people might not have died.
Right.
It bothers me that we are, as much as we talk about, being defenders of democracy, that we're not really defending it. We're cheerleading for it, and
yeah, but I think that the World War II, which is often held up as an example, and we have both done here, was unique in a lot of ways in the history of warfare and international conflict.
Every war since has been unique.
Well, every war since has been more like wars before that, in a lot of ways, before World War II.
Well, I don't know, before World War I, the war to end all wars changed warfare forever.
It did. There's some thought that countries are often fighting the last war instead of the next one. It's possible, and something to think about, that in this case, the US is fighting the next war instead of the last one. That meeting what's going on with armed forces rather than economic sanctions, cyber attacks, and other individual sanctions, other things that are being done, is the next war instead of the last one.
Okay.
Something to think about.
Sure. I hope it works. I hope that Putin says, oh, geez, this has become too expensive and my popularity is falling.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen with Putin. I don't think Putin will do that, but I think the possibility is that the people around him, the ones who have not yet fled, the oligarchs who have not yet fled, the advisors who he keeps at the 30 feet away at the end of a long table, will do something.
I would really like to see some explanation of that photo. That is just a weird.
Yes.
I mean, what is that about even? Is that my mind says that this is my suspicion of snapshots has become such that, is this a moment captured and used to illustrate a point that isn't really being demonstrated here?
Yeah, it's a good question, but it was one of their photos that they released. And so the question is, what, COVID protocols, or showing
all of them are sitting together. They're all sitting cheek by jowl at the other end of the table.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a question. Yeah, it is a question. And I think the editing and cropping of photos is always a question.
Yeah.
There was a great commercial. I think it was from the New York Times, and it showed several points of view of a thing happening where you see this guy running, and he's running at a person, and it looks like he's about to attack this person. And what he's actually doing,
there's something
in the larger shot, there's something falling, and he's actually saving and moving out of the way. And the point was, the larger context matters.
Yeah.
So
I wonder about that photograph. That what else is happening out of frame that makes this make some kind of sense? And if it is that he's just a paranoid and doesn't want to get within an accurate pistol shot.
Well, keep in mind that Putin has poisoned his political rivals.
Oh, yeah.
Not only imprisoned them like Navalny, but actually poisoned people.
He was both. Both.
And so I think that he's suspicious. He was head of the KGB.
Yeah.
So Of course he's paranoid.
but it's to me that speaks of, well, if he can't, distrust breeds distrust,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if he is treating his, I don't know what they call it, but his cabinet like that,
Effectively, yeah.
right? What is that doing to their psyche? That,
There was video of him, of Putin talking to his advisors and grilling them, and one of them wasn't effusive enough in his agreement, and Putin was just relentless and in saying, well, what are you saying, what are you saying? And it until the guy was like very flustered and saying, yeah, what, what, essentially whatever you say. And Putin looked really paranoid and deranged in that. But well, I keep coming back to the Sun Tzu quote about burn it all down and rule over the ashes. So,
well, like I said, I hope you are correct in that and I'm not talking about the oligarchs who will abandon him to, protect their nest eggs.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the military advisors who are standing around in a room with him at some point or another. He's got to issue orders somehow. They have to go through somebody.
Yeah.
That they'll just decide, you know what, this has gotten a little insane, and we all should get together and say no more.
Yeah.
And is Putin so powerful in that situation that men of that, who have that kind of power, who command armies, are afraid that they will die at his hands? Does he have, I mean, and this is a Hitler kind of a moment where he surrounded himself with true believers, as you said, with Gestapo. And they would draw and fire on, Hitler would point at somebody and a Gestapo would pull a pistol and kill them.
And it's possible. I just don't know. I don't think any of us know.
No.
But it is, on that note, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN got up and spoke, and he spoke at the UN, and he spoke to Putin, and he said, you should do like the guy did in the bunker in 1945 in Germany.
Yeah.
Meaning he was telling him to go kill himself.
Yeah.
So yeah, and we have Congress people who speak at white nationalist conventions, and we've got, people who think the election was stolen, and we've got, so
yeah, and that's what we were going to talk about.
that is, so maybe next time.
Maybe, if we're still here.
Yeah.
And all our communications are still working.
When I was in sixth grade, my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Dale P. Harper, U.S. Navy retired, who was also a civil defense warden, gave us a course in instruction in what to do in case of emergency, including fire, flood, tornado, which was relevant in northern Indiana, hurricanes, not so relevant, and nuclear war.
Yeah.
Including,
well, that's where the whole civil defense thing came from, was right after World War II, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I could calculate in the sixth grade, it was kind of a math exercise too. Given the yield in kilotons or megatons of a nuclear device and its altitude when detonated, what was the radius of immediate death, death within hours, death within days, lingering radiation effect, immediate destruction? I could calculate all of that. Yeah.
That's some bad math for a kid to have to learn.
Yeah. And I've seen posts where Gen Xers are saying, oh, this is what it was like growing up as a Gen Xer when you were thinking there'd be a nuclear war any minute. Excuse me, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. We had the movies Failsafe and Doctor Strangelove, episodes of Twilight Zone about nuclear war.
Yeah. Post-apocalyptic nightmares. And
yeah, I don't think I slept without nightmares for about 5 years in those days. And I don't know if you remember, there was a commercial, and I've shown it to my students. There was a commercial during the election of 1964 for presidential election, and it was only shown once. It was shown by the Johnson administration. It was called Girl with the Daisy. And it was a little girl, and she was plucking petals off a daisy. And it was very cute. 1, 2, 3, 5. And she gets to 10, and then it freezes and the camera zooms in on her, and you hear this voiceover doing a countdown: 10, 9, 8. And then when it gets to 0, thermonuclear bomb explosion. And the voiceover says, the election is too important not to vote. It's, and then there was a voiceover from President Johnson saying, the choice is clear. No, that's Kennedy. I can't do it. Johnson,
can do a Texas accent?
Texas drawl. The choice is clear.
The choice is clear.
We must love each. That sounded like Kennedy as well. We must love each other, or we must die. And then, so that aired once because the Goldwater campaign objected, but it was very effective at positioning Goldwater as somebody who would, as they say, push the button.
Yeah.
So. So with that, everybody,
have a nice evening.
Pleasant dreams.
Yeah. Well, I knew it wasn't going to be, happy. And this is our country has been marching toward authoritarianism for 50 years.
Yeah.
40 years. You can almost point to the 40-year mark. But longer than that, really, technically.
It really started with Goldwater's defeat in 1964, and then Reagan and the Federalist Society, the John Birch Society, the Koch brothers, whose father started the John Birch Society. There's so many different. There have been a lot of efforts to move us to authoritarianism, and
that is what we will talk about in a future episode.
Yes,
not this one.
Yes,
I think we're done with this one. It's been,
I think so,
long enough. People have been putting up with us long enough now.
Thank you all for listening. Please like, subscribe. Please email us, message us with topics you'd like us to discuss. And until next time, be thou
a good night
and true.